A new Gallup poll shows 69% of Americans now say trans athletes should only be able to play on teams that match their birth gender. 7-point shift towards that position since 2021. Among Democrats, too, from 41%, holding that position in 2021 to a 48% today. Now, I had this conversation with a bunch of Normans outside of the stream where, like, I basically described to them that the reason why they have any kind of opinion on this is because it was focus tested and found to be the most anger-inducing way to attack trans people. Because Normans do see that and they're like, yeah, I don't really get it. It doesn't seem fair. But of course they feel that way. That is precisely the reason why this is the anti-trans sentiment starting point, is how they try to hammer this in. The reason why they do that is because these psychotic Christian fundamentalist organizations and lobbyists were looking in the aftermath of the legalization of gay marriage for a new line of attack. And they recognize that trans people, a very small percentage of the population, that also, truly terrify people when they have to come to terms with their existence, because it basically unwinds everything they know about like rigid gender norms that have been there for their whole lives. They found that this would be a good line of attack. So they started off with bathrooms. They were like, oh, trans people are going to go to your bathrooms and that's going to be bad. They tried it in North Carolina, and the Democratic Party at the time, alongside all of the corporations, reacted to that in such a negative fashion that they realized, oh, fuck, we got to go back to the drawing board and find a new line of attack. And they focus tested all of these different lines of attack, right? North Carolina bathroom bill failed, so they were like, okay, maybe the bathroom thing looks kind of stupid. Let's look for something else. What they found basically was not to associate trans people with like a criminal element, because that's only for the crazies, but instead to tug on the heartstrings of Americans and their misunderstanding of fairness. Where is there an illusion of fairness? Where is there an actual meritocracy in the field of sports? So they found that if they married the anti-trans sentiment with another concept that Americans actually do care about, fairness in sports, they can find a much better avenue, a much better angle to attack. It was never actually about like fairness in sports. These are the same people who don't give a shit about like women's sports. Let's be real. They fucking laugh about it all the time. But they realized, oh, we are protecting our female girls from the trans scourge because trans girls want to compete with cis girls and they have an objective competitive advantage. And it didn't even matter if there was no serious competitive advantage for trans girls, for the record. That is precisely the reason why half the time people that are chirping about a trans girl that like loses to a fuckload of cis girls in that same competition. But it doesn't matter because the narrative has stuck. People will never believe you. When you show them that it's not true, that it's not actually happening, that what you think is not happening about trans people, they just do not believe you because it has already captivated them. From the likes of Joe Rogan all the way to, Matt Walsh, the political spectrum and the political commentary field is riddled with these kinds of attitudes. It worked. It was an objectively successful propaganda measure. The conversation was never actually about trans girls participating in sports, and there was no real problem with trans girls participating in sports, especially because there are like 3 trans student athletes in these fucking states to begin with, okay? Sometimes even less than that. It was so bad that the Utah governor himself straight up said, I'm going to veto a bill because I looked into the actual details of this, and there's only one 12-year-old trans girl that this would harm, that this would stop from participating. This is a ridiculous misuse of funds and time. Now, of course, like that, it doesn't matter. That guy, it's not like that person is fond of trans people or anything. But even that person had seen that it was ridiculous. Obviously, they overrode it anyway because they had a veto-proof majority. So that didn't even last in Utah. Okay, so they overrode that veto, and that passed through anyway. But in a lot of circumstances, these are like, you're getting one-girled, okay? Like one 12-year-old that you're bullying. Like a whole bunch of Republican legislators are getting together and just basically saying, we're going to write a bill that literally bullies one fucking 12-year-old, okay? One 14-year-old. That's what we're going to do. So, unfortunately, that actually created some really fucked up legislation in states like Kentucky, in states like Ohio, where they actually have penis inspection day now, where the overwhelming majority, if not damn near the entirety of the student body that is participating in student athletics is actually cis, they now are subject to penis inspection days if they perceive a cis girl to be trans. This is completely insane. This kind of legislation is absolutely insane, and yet it has passed through, and I do not hear from Democrats openly communicating how fucking unimaginably psychotic these Republicans are. That's where we're at. That's where we're at in this country. That's where we're at. And it was, of course, never just about trans girls participating in high school swim meets, because no one really cares about that. I'm sorry. It's in front of you. You feel like you care about it, but you don't really care about it. You don't lose any fucking sleep over it at night. It doesn't pertain. It doesn't touch your life in any meaningful way. The only person who would care about it are either the absolutely psychopathic transphobes or the actual trans people themselves. So it's silly. It's stupid. And these people go back to not caring about women's sports and making jokes about it as soon as this conversation is over. But it's a very good way to open the door to anti-trans sentiment. And that is precisely how the Republican Party and even some Democrats have been able to push this narrative. And the narrative never stops. Many of these other states have accompanying legislation that also bars, any kind of health care that a trans minor might get after a shitload of medical diagnoses, okay? None of which, by the way, is like irreversible, at least until they're 18. Very few of it is like actually top surgery, no bottom surgery whatsoever. And the top surgery in that regard is like incredibly rare, and oftentimes after a tremendous amount of back and forth with medical professionals. The broad majority of these kinds of procedures, including including irreversible medication or irreversible surgeries, come for adults. That's it. It's for adults. It is not easy to even get HRT in this country. It is certainly not easy to get top surgery, let alone bottom surgery in this country. It's exhausting. It is tremendously difficult. And in the state of California, even in California, in woke-ass California, it still takes many years to be able to get this comprehensive health care that you need. And that decision, every step of the way, is guided by medical professionals. A legislator should have no say in that regard. A schizophrenic Facebook QAnon uncle should have even less say in that regard. And yet, for some reason, we're getting the schizophrenic Facebook QAnon uncle and the Republican legislator, which is like basically the same as the schizophrenic Facebook QAnon uncle, to make these decisions on behalf of the American population. That's not freedom. That's not what America is about. Anti-LGBTQIA rhetoric, actions, and lawmaking have surged lately, particularly against the trans community. I want to believe it's just the vocal minority, but the voices on the right side of these issues need to wake the fuck up and get in the game. We're 2 weeks into Pride Month, but for anyone paying attention to things, feel a little different this year. I've never thought I'd miss the capitalistic performance of corporations pretending to deeply care about inclusivity, but the relative silence this year is deafening. Many corporations have clearly done the math and decided that the momentum behind the hate is scarier than whatever backlash they'll face from people sitting on the sidelines. Fuck that. We're clearly not loud enough. A professor of anthropology recently attended the Conservative Political Action Conference, CPAC, which he describes as ground zero for the current onslaught of anti-trans rhetoric and legislation in the United States. His reflections are terrifying. Transgenderism must be eradicated from public life entirely, said one speaker, in 2023, in a supposed global beacon of freedom. This isn't novel, by the way. It's often forgotten that Hitler brutally targeted the trans community as a part of his genocide. Yeah, exactly. My first exposure to the plight of trans people in the U.S. was 2008, when I was an intern for a nonprofit and they asked me to write a memo on ways to improve the juvenile justice and foster care for LGBT youths. I'll never forget reading their stories. This was the most vulnerable subset of the most vulnerable population, children, and the state failed to protect them in every conceivable way. 15 years later, very little has changed. Polling of trans people in the U.S. today is heartbreaking. 24% have been physically attacked because they were trans. 13% were sexually assaulted because they were trans. 17% experienced such a severe mistreatment that they left the school. 30% report being fired, denied a promotion, or experiencing some other form of mistreatment in the workplace. 40% have attempted suicide in their lifetime, nearly 9 times the attempted suicide rate in the population. These are human beings. We're failing them as a society. It's not enough to be a part of the problem. It's not enough not to be a part of the problem. You have to be a part of the solution. Volunteer, donate, act, speak, do whatever you can, do something. Trans rights and lives are under siege throughout the United States and have been for some time. The battle lines are constantly redefined by the machine of hate's propaganda apparatus. First, it was trans people ruined sports. But when the Associated Press asked lawmakers who were seeking to pass these discriminatory bills to cite a problem in their cases, not a single lawyer could identify a single case. Remember, this is huge. When you take up a case to the Supreme Court of the United States, okay, or any law, okay, or any kind of judicial body, if you want to do a lawsuit, if you want to create a lawsuit, you have to show harm. These people did not have to do that because the state legislatures can completely avoid that. They can completely sidestep any kind of harm narrative. They can create their own harm narrative, and they never have to actually show the work, because that's how the legislative body works, if you want, especially in the absence of any kind of counter-narrative or counter-propaganda. The Associated Press asked lawmakers who were seeking to pass these discriminatory bills that would stop, like, trans athletes from participating in high school level athletics. And they were like, okay, so where is this a problem? And they had no fucking answer. Swedish players had to show their genitalia at the 2011 Women's World Cup, says Nyla Fisher. Fisher says she had to pull down her training pants and underwear. Test done after allegations of men in the Equatorial Guinea squad. And the irony is, transvestigations, because this is what it is. This is a transvestigation, which is the highest form of transphobia, the most insane form of transphobia, will inevitably happen because the reality is gender is socially learned. It is a social construct, no matter which way you cut it. And the moment that you start thinking anyone and everyone could be trans, you're going to start realizing a lot of cis women in your life, they're going to be considered trans by other psychopaths. This was happening back in 2011. But this is something that people do not understand. This is something that they do not comprehend. This was what I was talking about. When the governor of Utah vetoed a trans sports ban last year, here's what he had to say on the matter. And this is probably one of the best arguments I've seen on this issue. And I covered it back then. 75,000 high school kids participating in high school sports in Utah. 4 transgender kids play high school sports in Utah. 1 transgender student plays girl sports. 86% of trans youth report suicidality. 56% of trans youth have attempted suicide. 4 kids and only 1 of them is playing girl sports. That's what this is about. All of this is about that. 4 kids who aren't dominating or winning trophies or taking scholarships. 4 kids who are just trying to find some friends and feel like they're a part of something. 4 kids trying to get through each day. Rarely has so much fear and anger been directed at so few. Reuters worked with health technology company Komodo Health Inc. to identify how common it is for minors to receive gender-affirming care. Unsurprisingly, it is quite uncommon, putting numbers on the rise of children seeking gender care. Diagnoses of youths with gender dysphoria have surged between patients ages 6 to 17, okay? It went from 15,000 to 42,000, which is still it's still a tiny fraction. Conservatives look at this and go, whoa, that's social contagion, okay? That's because people are getting transed. Our children are susceptible to this kind of narrative. But the reality is, it's not people getting trans. It's people recognizing that that is a concept that basically they associate with themselves. It addresses how they feel internally better than anything else. That's it. And the number of patients between ages 6 to 17 and prior gender dysphoria diagnosis initiating puberty blocker treatment is so tiny. In 2021, it was 1,390. 1,390. That's what we're having an argument over.
Conservative politicians, influencers, and hate groups.
I recently got my hands on a trove of leaked emails for an exclusive investigation that revealed how the countrywide assault on transgender healthcare has been orchestrated in part by an under-the-radar network of conservative activists, fringe doctors, and religious right lawyers.
Oh, shit. What's up, dude? Austin's here.
As I speak, 7 states have already banned gender-affirming medical care for trans kids. And these attacks on transgender healthcare are just one part of an even bigger wave of over 400 anti-LGBTQ bills introduced by state lawmakers this year alone. To understand how we got here, you have to start back in South Dakota with Republican State Representative Fred Deutsch.
In 2020, I brought a similar bill HB 1057, and each of you can go into your computers and look.
Back in 2019, Deutsch
Did
sent
you
an
order
email
already?
to 18
No.
anti-trans doctors, lawyers, and activists with the text of a bill he planned to introduce that would make it a felony for doctors to give transgender kids under 16 gender-affirming medical care. Among them is the Alliance Defending Freedom.
Freedom cannot survive in a culture that has abandoned truth and rejected reality. This is the battle of our generation.
A religious right legal behemoth that's defended state-sanctioned sterilization of trans people in Europe.
One powerful Christian legal organization has been planning a strategy to overturn Roe v. Wade. Their plan worked.
Also on the emails is the innocent-sounding American College of Pediatricians.
I began to notice that they were drifting away from science-based policies, but the tipping point for me and my co-founding colleagues came when the AAP endorsed same-sex adoption.
In the emails, you can see exactly how these conservative groups and anti-trans
was the breaking
activists
point for
work
me,
with
brother.
state lawmakers to push their
Don't let them adopt.
legislation into
That's
states
right.
beyond
I draw
South
the line
Dakota.
right there.
At least 18 states this year are considering legislation that closely
Like literally thousands of children in the foster system, and like
They'd
these
rather
guys are
just-
trying to eliminate
Options.
like
parent
yeah,
options.
like perfectly capable parents.
Actually, in many cases, more capable parents.
Yeah.
As the race for 2024 heats up, so do the attacks on people who are just trying to live their full lives.
Day one, I will revoke Joe Biden's cruel policies on so-called gender-affirming care and pass a law prohibiting child sexual mutilation in all 50 states. It'll go very quickly.
Representative
quickly.
Deutsch declined to comment for my story.
Very
It's
sad.
like, wow, he's gonna stop something that's not happening. So yeah, we talked about it. They're very deliberate. They did it on purpose. And now 69% of Americans say trans athletes should be the only one to play teams that match their birth gender, but it's not about trans athletes at all. It's not about high school athletics at all. It's absolutely about trans people. That's all they care about.